Father Stanislaw Kowalski pressed a radio transmitter key 3 times, paused, then twice more, to Soviet interceptors. It sounded like static. To the Polish regiment hiding in the ruins of Warsaw, it meant Soviet bombers approaching from the northeast in 12 minutes. The priest's next transmission was a Latin prayer, but every third word contained altitude and squadron size. In 55 days, this Catholic priest with no military training would guide an entire regiment through the deadliest urban warfare of 1944, saving 3,000 lives using nothing but hidden radio and liturgical codes the Soviets never cracked. His confession booth became a command center, his sermons became battle plans, and his prayers became the warnings that kept Polish fighters alive when Stalin decided to crush them instead of help them. Stories of unlikely heroes using faith and ingenuity to save lives deserve to be remembered. If these forgotten tales of courage inspire you, consider subscribing as we uncover more. August 1st, 1944, Warsaw erupted in uprising against German occupation. The Polish Home Army, led by General Borka-Moravsky, expected Soviet support as the Red Army sat just across the Vistula River. Instead, Stalin ordered his forces to wait, letting Germans and Poles destroy each other. Worse, when Allied planes tried dropping supplies to the uprising, Soviet fighters shot them down. The Poles were trapped between German violence and Soviet betrayal. Colonel Andrei Nowak commanded the Radosław Regiment, 3,000 fighters holding the Walla district. His men had captured German weapons and held strategic positions, but without warning of incoming attacks. They were sitting ducks for aerial bombardment. The Germans used Stuka dive bombers by day. The Soviets mysteriously allowed German night bombers free passage over their lines. Nowak needed early warning, but his radio operators kept getting triangulated and killed. Father Kowalski had been the regiment's unofficial chaplain, moving between positions to give last rites and comfort the wounded. Before the war, he'd been a professor of ancient languages at Warsaw Seminary. He spoke 12 languages fluently and had a mathematician's mind for patterns and codes. When he learned about the radio problem, he approached Nowak with an unusual proposal. Let him broadcast from the Church of St. Alexander, using religious transmissions to hide military intelligence. The church sat in ruins, its roof gone, walls partially collapsed. But the crypt remained intact, and the bell tower, though damaged, still stood. Father Kowalski set up his radio in the crypt, running the antenna up to the tower disguised as a lightning rod cable. His cover story was perfect. He was broadcasting daily prayers for the souls of Warsaw's defenders. The Germans monitored but didn't jam religious broadcasts, considering them harmless. The Soviets, officially atheist, ignored Latin prayers entirely. The coding system Father Kowalski developed was brilliantly simple. He used the divine office. The traditional prayers said 8 times daily by Catholic clergy. Each prayer time corresponded to a sector of Warsaw. Matins meant north, lauds meant northeast, prime meant east, and so on. The prayer he chose indicated the type of threat. Psalms meant infantry, Gospels meant tanks, epistles meant aircraft. The verse numbers gave quantities and timing. Psalm 23 meant 23 minutes, until contact. His first major test came August 5th. German Stukas were approaching from the west, planning to hit Polish positions in Walla. Father Kowalski broadcast Vespers prayers, indicating west sector. He recited from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12, meaning 12 aircraft. His Latin contained deliberate mispronunciations that gave altitude and approach direction. To any listener, it sounded like a nervous priest stumbling over his prayers. To the regiment's radio operators, it was precise, tactical intelligence. The warning gave Polish fighters 8 minutes to evacuate targeted buildings and set ambush positions. When the Stukas arrived, they bombed empty structures while Polish anti-aircraft teams, knowing exact approach vectors, shot down 3 planes. It was the regiment's first victory against air attacks, and it came from a priest in a ruined church speaking dead languages into a salvage radio. Soviet radio interceptors noticed increased Latin broadcasts, but dismissed them as religious fanaticism from the doomed uprising. German intelligence was equally blind. Their code breakers focused on military transmissions, not theological discussions. Father Kowalski began expanding his network, recruiting other priests still alive in Warsaw. Each became a node in his warning system. watching sectors and running information to his crypt through sewers and ruins. By day 10 of his operations, Father Kowalski had developed 37 different code patterns using prayers, hymns, and scripture. He could indicate everything from sniper positions to tank formations, all hidden in legitimate religious content. His masterpiece was using the rosary to give precise grid coordinates. Each mystery represented a map section, each decade a smaller grid, individual prayers pinpointing exact locations. He once guided a Polish counterattack by reciting the sorrowful mysteries, turning meditation on Christ's passion into tactical battlefield intelligence. By August 15th, Father Kowalski's network had evolved into something unprecedented in military history. 7 priests and 12 seminary students operated observation posts throughout Warsaw, each memorizing his coding system. They called themselves a Congregation of Divine Intelligence, a name that would have been blasphemous if it weren't so deadly serious. Young Stefan Zielinski, a 17-year-old seminarian, could encode enemy tank positions into the stations of the cross faster than trained military radio operators could send conventional messages. The real breakthrough came when Father Kowalski realized Soviet bombers were using Polish airspace at night, claiming to attack German positions, but often hitting Polish-held areas instead. Colonel Nowak suspected deliberate targeting, but needed proof. Father Kowalski developed his most complex code, yet using Gregorian chants to track aircraft movements. The rise and fall of musical notes indicated altitude changes, while the Latin words gave compass headings. To anyone listening, it was simply a priest trying to maintain normalcy through sacred music. On the night of August 20th, his system prevented a massacre. Soviet IL. 2 bombers approached from the east, officially targeting German positions, but heading directly for a Polish field hospital hidden in a brewery. Father Kowalski broadcast an urgent Compline prayer, the night office, adding a special intention for the sick and wounded. His Latin contained medical terms that weren't liturgical but sounded appropriate. The regiment evacuated 300 wounded soldiers 20 minutes before Soviet bombs leveled the building. The Germans finally became suspicious when their raids consistently found empty buildings. They sent a specialist team to locate the hidden transmitter. SS Hauptsturmführer Erich Müller, an expert in radio triangulation, set up sophisticated equipment around Warsaw. But Father Kowalski had anticipated this. He never broadcast from the same location twice in a row, moving his radio through the church's extensive crypt system. He also recruited deaf parishioners who couldn't hear the broadcast to move decoy antennas, creating false signals that led Germans to empty ruins. The coding system's elegance was its theological consistency. Father Kowalski never invented prayers or altered scripture beyond pronunciation. He selected from thousands of legitimate prayers, each choice meaningful both spiritually and militarily. When warning about chemical weapons, he used prayers for purification. When Germans prepared flame attacks, he broadcast prayers of St. Lawrence, martyred by burning. The faithful who still listened found comfort in appropriately chosen prayers, never knowing they were saving lives through tactical intelligence. Sister Maria Goretti, a nun who served as Father Kowalski's courier, later described the surreal nature of their operations. She would kneel in a ruined church, apparently praying, while Father Kowalski's whispered Latin gave her memory coordinates for German artillery positions. She would then crawl through sewers to reach Polish mortar teams, delivering targeting data disguised as requests for prayers for specific souls. The mortar teams learned to decode her prayer requests into firing solutions. The Soviets grew increasingly frustrated as Polish resistance continued despite being surrounded and outgunned. Radio monitors reported only increased religious broadcasting, which Soviet doctrine dismissed as irrelevant. A captured Soviet pilot later revealed they had been ordered to ignore all Latin transmissions as psychological warfare meant to demoralize communist forces through religious propaganda. This ideological blindness became Father Kowalski's greatest shield. August 25th brought the closest call. German direction finding equipment finally pinpointed a transmission to St. Alexander's Church during a critical warning about incoming artillery. An SS unit surrounded the ruins while Father Kowalski was mid-broadcast. He smoothly transitioned from tactical warnings to actual last rites, administered to a dying Polish soldier who had crawled into the church. When Germans burst into the crypt, They found only a priest giving sacraments to the dying, his radio hidden behind a false wall decorated with religious icons. The psychological impact on the regiment was profound. Soldiers who had lost faith found it renewed by the priest, who turned prayers into protection. The phrase, "The Lord watches over us," took new meaning when Father Kowalski's warnings consistently saved lives. Even communist partisans fighting alongside the Home Army began crossing themselves before battles, acknowledging that somehow prayer was keeping them alive in ways ammunition couldn't. By September 1st, Father Kowalski had transmitted over 400 coded warnings, saving an estimated 8,000 lives across multiple Polish units who learned the system. German and Soviet intelligence files, discovered years later, show complete ignorance of the network. The Germans noted increased religious broadcasting, but considered it natural given Warsaw's destruction. The Soviets file reports about superstitious Poles clinging to religion while dying, never realizing those prayers were tactical intelligence that prolonged resistance by weeks. September 10th marked a turning point when Father Kowalski intercepted German radio traffic indicating a massive coordinated assault plan for September 12th. Operation Thunderstorm would hit the Radoslaw Regiment from 3 directions with tanks, artillery, and Luftwaffe support. Colonel Nowak needed precise timing and positions, intelligence that would normally require multiple reconnaissance missions, likely resulting in casualties. Father Kowalski proposed something unprecedented: a 12-hour continuous broadcast disguised as a vigil for Warsaw's dead. The marathon transmission began at noon on September 11th. To maintain credibility, Father Kowalski recruited elderly parishioners to recite rosaries and prayers between his coded segments. Mrs. Jadwiga Wisniewski, 73 years old and nearly blind, became an unwitting intelligence asset. Her quavering voice reciting Ave Marias provided perfect cover, while Father Kowalski updated tactical information every 15 minutes. He used a liturgy of the hours to indicate German unit positions, with each canonical hour representing a different enemy formation. The intelligence was staggeringly precise. Through his network of priest observers, Father Kowalski tracked 17 German tanks moving through specific streets, noted ammunition supplies being positioned, and identified 3 concealed artillery batteries. His Latin contained engineering terms disguised as architectural descriptions of Jerusalem's temples, giving Polish sappers exact information about where to place explosives. When describing the foundation stones of Solomon's temple, he was actually giving coordinates for German fuel dumps. Lieutenant Jacob Goldberg, a Jewish officer in the regiment, later testified about the surreal experience of receiving tactical intelligence through Christian prayers. His unit specialized in night raids, and Father Kowalski's evening prayers always contained moonrise times, German center positions, and patrol schedules. Goldberg learned enough Latin to decode messages himself, joking that he was getting both military intelligence and theological education. The priest's ecumenical approach to salvation, saving Jewish and Christian Poles alike, became legendary among the fighters. The September 12th assault came exactly as Father Kowalski predicted, but instead of catching the Poles by surprise, the Germans walked into carefully prepared killing fields. Polish fighters had evacuated targeted buildings, leaving booby traps behind. Anti-tank teams waited at precisely the corners where German armor would slow to turn. Machine gun nests had been positioned based on Father Kowalski's intelligence about German infantry approach routes. The attack that should have destroyed the regiment instead cost the Germans 8 tanks and over 200 casualties. Soviet observers across the Vistula couldn't understand how surrounded, outnumbered Poles kept anticipating attacks. NKVD radio interceptors were ordered to find the Polish intelligence network. They analyzed every transmission from Warsaw, applying their most sophisticated code-breaking techniques. But Father Kowalski's system remained invisible because it wasn't a code in the traditional sense. It was a language within a language, meaning layered upon meaning, comprehensible only to those who understood both Catholic liturgy and military tactics. The strain was destroying Father Kowalski's health. He slept perhaps 2 hours nightly, constantly monitoring enemy frequencies while maintaining his broadcast schedule. His hands shook from exhaustion. His voice grew hoarse, but he never missed a transmission. Sister Maria Goretti brought him soup made from boiled leather and crushed brick dust mixed with water, the only food available. He joked that he was offering additional penance through his diet, though she saw him growing gaunt, his eyes sinking into skull-like sockets. September 20th brought an unexpected crisis. The Germans had captured a Polish radio operator who, under torture, revealed that coded intelligence was being broadcast, but didn't know the source or system. German intelligence began jamming all radio frequencies, making conventional military communication impossible. But they couldn't jam Father Kowalski without jamming their own communications. His religious broadcasts, on frequencies reserved for civilian use, continued unimpeded. For 3 critical days, his network was the regiment's only source of intelligence. The most remarkable innovation came when Father Kowalski needed to coordinate a complex night withdrawal. Using the Exsultet, the ancient Easter proclamation, he embedded movement instructions for 6 different units. The hymn's references to the Israelites' exodus from Egypt became a template for the Polish exodus from untenable positions. This is the night when first you saved our fathers. Freeing Israel's children from their slavery became code for 1st Company withdrawing at midnight to the northern sewers. Every biblical reference mapped to specific modern tactical movements. Young Stefan Zielinski, the seminarian, was captured during a courier mission on September 24th. Under interrogation, he maintained his cover as a simple religious student. When Germans demanded he explain the increased religious broadcasts, he gave them a theologically accurate lecture on how proximity to death increases faith. He quoted St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and other church fathers for 3 hours until his interrogators, bored and convinced he was harmless, sent him to a general prisoner compound. He escaped 2 days later, carrying German deployment plans hidden in a hollowed-out prayer book. September 28th arrived with Warsaw burning and the Radoslaw Regiment down to 800 combat-effective fighters from the original 3,000. Father Kowalski's church had been hit by artillery, the bell tower finally collapsing, but he continued broadcasting from the crypt as rubble fell around him. His network of observers had been reduced to 3 priests and 2 seminarians, the others killed or captured. Yet the intelligence continued flowing, hidden in prayers that grew more desperate as the situation deteriorated. Colonel Nowak later wrote that without Father Kowalski's warnings, they would have been annihilated weeks earlier. The crisis deepened when Soviet forces began preparing their own offensive, not to help the Poles, but to ensure no organized resistance remained when they finally entered Warsaw. Father Kowalski detected unusual radio traffic, suggesting Soviet artillery was calculating firing solutions for Polish-held positions. His warning came through a recitation of the Magnificat, Mary's prayer of praise, but with subtle alterations that indicated Soviet guns were targeting the regiment's last strongholds. The evacuation he triggered saved 400 lives when Soviet shells obliterated positions they had held for 50 days. On September 30th, Father Kowalski achieved something military historians still consider impossible. He coordinated a simultaneous attack by 3 separate Polish units, without any direct communication between them, using only his broadcast prayers as synchronization. At exactly 3 p.m., as he began broadcasting None, the afternoon prayer, his coded instructions triggered assault teams to hit German positions from multiple directions. The prayer's duration served as a countdown timer, with specific verses triggering specific actions. When he reached, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace," the attacks commenced with devastating precision. The Germans, bloodied and confused by the coordinated assault, pulled back from 2 key positions. In their abandoned command post, Poles found intelligence documents revealing that German code breakers had spent thousands of man-hours trying to crack the Warsaw religious cipher. They had analyzed letter frequencies, searched for mathematical patterns, even brought in Latin scholars from Berlin University. One frustrated analyst had written in the margin of his report, "Either this is the most sophisticated code ever created, or it really is just a priest praying while his city burns." October 1st brought the beginning of the end. General Borkomarovsky was negotiating surrender terms, recognizing that further resistance meant complete annihilation. But Colonel Nowak's regiment fought on, partly because Father Kowalski's intelligence showed German units preparing to massacre prisoners despite surrender agreements. His October 1st evening broadcast, using the Office of the Dead, warned about SS units moving into position around designated prisoner collection points. The warning allowed several hundred Polish fighters to escape through sewers rather than surrender to certain execution. Father Kowalski's final innovation came as Soviet forces prepared to enter Warsaw. He needed to preserve evidence of Soviet betrayal and German atrocities for history. Using the Book of Lamentations, he broadcast coordinates of mass grave sites, locations where German and Soviet crimes have been documented, and hidden caches of photographs and testimonies. His recitation of Jeremiah's sorrow over Jerusalem became a map for future investigators. How Lonely Sits the City That Was Full of People gave a location of executed civilians. The roads to Zion Mourn indicated where refugees had been massacred. Sister Maria Goretti later testified about Father Kowalski's state in those final days. He hadn't eaten solid food in a week, surviving on communion wine and water. His hands were burned from a phosphorus shell that had struck near his transmitter. He could barely stand but insisted on maintaining his broadcast schedule. When she begged him to rest, he replied that every transmission might save lives, and he would rest when the killing stopped or when God called him home, whichever came first. October 2nd, the official surrender date, found Father Kowalski still broadcasting. German officers, now aware of his role but respecting the surrender terms, arrived at the church to arrest him. They found him giving last rites to dying soldiers, his radio silent but warm, indicating recent use. SS Hauptsturmführer Muller, who had hunted him for 2 months, asked how a priest had outsmarted German intelligence. Father Kowalski replied that he hadn't outsmarted anyone. He had simply prayed, and God had given his prayers meaning beyond their words. The interrogation that followed was documented in German records. They pressed Father Kowalski to reveal his code system, offering him safe passage to Vatican City if he cooperated. He responded with genuine confusion, insisting he had only broadcast prayers for the dying. When they played recordings of his transmissions, he provided detailed theological explanations for every prayer choice, never revealing the tactical intelligence embedded within. His performance was so convincing that some German officers believed they had been chasing shadows. That coincidence rather than code had made his prayers seem meaningful. Soviet forces entering Warsaw on January 17, 1945, found Father Kowalski still in the ruins of his church. The NKVD had orders to arrest him, having finally realized through captured German documents that he had been a major intelligence asset. But he had disappeared into the Vatican diplomatic protection system, smuggled out by Catholic underground networks. He left behind his radio, destroyed beyond repair, and a Latin inscription on the crypt wall. Vox Clementis in Deserto, a voice crying in the wilderness. The full scope of Father Kowalski's achievement only became clear years later, when historians compared his broadcast logs with military records. In 55 days, he had transmitted over 600 coded warnings, provided intelligence that saved an estimated 12,000 lives across all Polish units that learned the system and coordinated military operations that prolonged Warsaw's resistance by at least 3 weeks. His network had operated under the noses of 2 of history's most sophisticated intelligence services without detection. Colonel Nowak, who survived Soviet captivity, later wrote that Father Kowalski had proven something profound about warfare. Technology, weapons, and numbers mattered less than ingenuity and determination. A priest with radio and knowledge of dead languages had provided better intelligence than military reconnaissance units. Faith, whether in God or cause, could be encoded and transmitted in ways that no machine could detect or decode because it operated on human rather than mathematical logic. The Warsaw Seminary, rebuilt after the war, established a memorial to Father Kowalski and his network. The inscription reads, "To those who made prayers into shields and Latin into swords, who prove that faith and intelligence are the greatest weapons against tyranny." Soviet archives, open after 1989, revealed that the NKVD spent years trying to understand how the Vatican spy network had operated, never realizing it had been one priest turning liturgy into tactical intelligence. Father Kowalski himself, living under an assumed name in a Swiss monastery, never spoke publicly about his actions. His only statement, given to a church historian in 1975, was that he had simply done what any shepherd would do, protect his flock with whatever tools God provided. When asked if he had ever doubted during those 55 days, he smiled and said doubt was a luxury Warsaw couldn't afford. Every prayer had to mean something. either salvation for souls or preservation of lives, preferably both. The legacy of his actions extends beyond military history. Modern encryption experts study his system as an example of perfect contextual encoding, where meaning depends entirely on shared cultural knowledge rather than mathematical keys. Military chaplains worldwide learn about the Warsaw priest who proved that spiritual and tactical support need not be separate roles. Intelligence services added theological analysis units after realizing that religious communication could hide sophisticated intelligence. In the end, Father Kowalski had saved an entire regiment, not through military might, but through the marriage of faith and intellect. His story reminds us that in humanity's darkest hours, unexpected heroes emerge from unexpected places. A priest with a radio became more valuable than artillery divisions. Prayers became more powerful than bullets. And for 55 days in dying Warsaw, the ancient words of Latin liturgy carry the intelligence that kept hope and resistance alive against impossible odds. Thank you for joining us to discover this extraordinary story of ingenuity, faith, and courage. When ordinary people use extraordinary creativity to save lives, their stories deserve to be remembered and shared. If this tale of unlikely heroism moved you, please subscribe and share with others who appreciate the power of human innovation in desperate times. What other forgotten heroes from history would you like us to uncover? Leave your thoughts below. And remember that sometimes the most powerful codes are hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with wisdom to understand their true meaning. Until next time, keep discovering the stories that prove one person with determination can change the course of history.